Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! History with Joe Giorlando. In today's video, I'm going to profile two versions of Machine Beatdown that were popular during the summer of 2007. So we've already profiled two decks from 2007. We've profiled the Korn Monarch deck that, of course, Adam Korn ran to win the 2007 US Nationals. We've also profiled the T-Hero variant that was popular really throughout the duration of the format. And if you watch some of my previous videos, you would have also seen me run a Perfect Circle variant, a Monarch deck that combines Destiny Heroes with Monarchs. We'll eventually profile anything from Demise OTKs to DDT and some decks in between, but today we're going to profile Machine Beatdown. Machine Beatdown was first popularized by Peddle at the 2007 Canadian Nationals. He made it all the way to the top 8 with the variant that we're going to profile today. We'll profile his exact deck. Then in the second half of the video, we're actually going to profile another version of Machine Beatdown because there was really two different approaches that were common at the time. In the second half of the video, we're going to profile the Philly Luna variant, which was a little bit more aggro, a little bit more OTK based, and we'll talk about why there was a shift and some of the differences between the two versions. Again, context matters. This deck was particularly powerful and successful for a couple different reasons. One, it utilized 3 copies of Cyber Phoenix. Cyber Phoenix at this point in time was more than just a machine that replaced itself when it was destroyed by battle. It also had an anti-targeting effect. Now, we're talking about a format where Brain Control was at 3. The last time it was at 3 without the errata. We're talking about a format where Snatch Steal was legal. Ring of Destruction was legal. Monarch decks were running Soul Exchange. There were some decks that had 5, 6, 7 cards that targeted. Cyber Phoenix did a fantastic job shutting out your opponent from those targeting effects, and then also had that replacement effect itself. It also comboed really well with Call of the Haunted. You could play Call of the Haunted on a Cyber Phoenix and it would actually remain on the board. There were some variants where you could make that play and actually keep monsters alive when a Chimera Tech came out. One of the things that happened when Chimera Tech Overdragon came out off of Future Fusion is it would blow up the field. But if you're actually able to Call the Haunted a Cyber Phoenix, it would keep the Chimera Tech on the board. So Cyber Phoenix had a lot of really interesting applications beyond just the targeting effect, stopping your opponent from playing, for example, Ring. Then this deck is also going to utilize 3 copies of Trap Dust Shoot. Dust Shoot was one of the most prominent, most important elements of the 2007 summer season. And really, if there was any single deck that put Trap Dust Shoot on the map, it was this version of Machine Beatdown, the Matt Peddle version from the Canadian Nationals. Now, don't get me wrong, people ran Dust Shoot before then. You will go back, if you look at the top 16 or the top 8 of the Shonen Jump in Philadelphia before that Nationals, people ran Dust Shoot. But when Matt Peddle combined 3 Dust Shoots with 3 Cyber Phoenixes, it really put 2 and 2 together for a lot of players. And then as the format progressed, Trap Dust Shoot became a borderline staple in any controlling deck. Because when you think about it, Trap Dust Shoot really fulfilled a lot of the requirements that you were looking for a really powerful card. One, it stopped the OTK decks like Demise. You could chain it to Advanced Ritual Art and survive the OTK. And even if they had multiple Demises, you could at least take something like the Doom Dozer, which was the other combo part they needed. 2, T-Hero decks, even Perfect Circle decks, quite frankly, really cared about specific monster cards in their hands so they could discard them with Destiny Draw, so they could discard them with Snipe Hunter. If you rid them of those combo pieces, or you slowed them down by taking away a card trooper and leaving them with Machine Dupe, those decks had a lot of difficulty coming back. And now if the opponent's sitting there with Cyber Phoenix and you're staring at a hand of Machine Dupe, Brain Control, Ring, you're probably going to lose. So the Trap Dust Shoot Cyber Phoenix package did a really good job slowing down some of those combo-centric decks. And then the Monarch decks had a really difficult time with Dust Shoot, particularly when Cyber Phoenix was on the board. If your opponent flipped Trap Dust Shoot to a Soul Exchange, taking your only Monarch, you'd probably lose the game right there. If you're sitting there with a handful of Monarchs and targeting spells and your opponent just went Dust Shoot Cyber Phoenix, you're probably going to lose that game too if you don't quickly gain access to a Cyber Dragon, or draw a Spy, assuming your opponent didn't put those back into your deck off the Dust Shoot in the first place. And now next thing you know, you've been locked out of the game. So this machine deck, both variants really, did a fantastic job pinpointing the weaknesses of the format, exploiting those weaknesses, and then also just being a really powerful deck on its own. I mean, you have a deck with 3 Card Troopers, 3 Decoiches, and 3 Cyber Phoenixes. This deck is going to draw through itself really quickly, replace itself as the game progresses. This deck gets to run duplication and limiter removal, so it also gets to OTK out of nowhere, and then has that controlling element of Cyber Phoenix and Trap Dust Shoot. It really has the best of both worlds. A little bit of combo, a little bit of control, awesome streamlined deck as a whole, a lot of 3-outs, really consistent hands. And again, we're going to profile 2 variants today, the Matt Peddle version which I consider the more controlling version. Then a little bit more of an OTK-centric version, but a little bit more on the one-of side. The Philly Luna variant from the middle to the end of the format, that's a little bit more OTK-centric. All right, we'll start the deck profile first with 3 copies of Dokoichi. The typical Machine Beatdown deck basically played 3 copies of the 4 best Machine monsters. So then we had 3 copies of Cyber Dragon, 3 copies of Card Trooper, and finally, to wrap it up, 3 copies of Cyber Phoenix. So Cyber Phoenix was an important addition to this deck. Not that this deck really existed before, but it was an important discovery in the middle of this format, because at this point in the format, a lot of the decks that were dominating involved using brain control to sort of steal wins out of nowhere, or to combine cards like Soul Exchange with Monarchs, plus cards like Snatch Steal were legal in virtually every deck, legal and played in every deck. Cards like Ring of Destruction were legal and played in every deck. Cards like Sakuratsu Armor were really popular by the middle stages of the format. So when Matt Peddle elected to run this Machine Beatdown deck, he in many ways tried to pinpoint the format at a point in time where Cyber Phoenix was more than just a machine that replaced itself, but at the targeting effect where your opponent could not target your machines when it was in the face-up attack position was actually a valuable asset. And if you look back at the decks at the time period, Cyber Phoenix did a really good job shutting down a lot of what was popular. And when you run 3 Cyber Phoenix, 3 Card Trooper, and 3 Dokoichi, one of the main features of this deck is that you're always replenishing your hand. In terms of some other support monsters, Matt elected to run 2 copies of Mystic Tomato, and as the Tomato package, we had 1 copy of Snipe Hunter, 1 Spirit Reaper, and 1 Sangan. I was never a big fan of Snipe Hunter throughout the entirety of this format and really beyond that, but nevertheless, it was popular quite a bit during that format. A lot of people ran it, even in a deck like this where it doesn't necessarily seem like it fits, but we'll profile what Matt ran. And then the last monster was a copy of Jinzo. It was a machine, obviously the only tribute monster. Your deck does run brain control, so I guess having 1 tribute monster besides the Cyber Dragon was useful. So that was the monster lineup. So for Matt Peddle's deck at the Canadian Nationals, we have 2 copies of Brain Control. The card was at 3, but Matt elected only to run 2. Again, there's only really the Jinzo and the Cyber Dragons that you could tribute off. Otherwise, you're trying to outright beat your opponent, actually OTK them. Perhaps he comboed that quite frequently with Machine Duplication. Machine Duplication, of course, powerful with the 3 copies of Card Trooper that virtually everybody was running. If you brain controlled your opponent's Card Trooper, you could Machine Duplication it for 2 more copies. So the brain control dupe package, 2 of each. And then from that, there were a bunch of power one-ofs. We had a Pot of Avarice, a Premature Burial, borderline staple, Snatch Steal, borderline staple, a single Nobleman of Crossout, which was really good against the Gravekeeper Spy that was quite popular during the format. We have a Limiter Removal, which of course this is a machine deck, so we can steal wins out of nowhere, particularly with brain control in our deck. We had Heavy Storm and Mystical Space Typhoon, some spell and trap card removal. We had a copy of Scapegoats, which at the time was one of the best ways of avoiding OTKs. The T-Hero deck, and even this deck to a certain extent, although at the Canadian Nationals, Matt definitely wouldn't have played many mirror matches. This deck did not really get popular until he popularized it at the Canadian Nationals. Then it really took off at the US Nationals the following event. But that Scapegoat's still really good against DDT variants, which might have still had some popularity. And then certainly the T-Hero variants, which were everywhere. And then his deck elected one copy of Confiscation. It actually wasn't a staple during this format. A lot of people sided it. But this deck especially tried to take a lot of cards out of your opponent's hand to make it so that the Cyber Phoenix really did leave your opponent with a bunch of dead cards. Because unlike Dust Shoot, Confiscation can hit spell and trap cards, so you could theoretically take your opponent's Mirror Force, leave them with Sakuratsu Armor, and now your Cyber Phoenix Beatdown plan is really going to work. This was really one of the times, not that this card was not used before. People were using this card prior to the Canadian Nationals, but when Matt Peddle combined Dust Shoot and then Confiscation with Cyber Phoenix and really built this package to disrupt your opponent's hand and their game plan, we really saw this Trap Dust Shoot plan take off at the following event at the US Nationals. So triple Dust Shoot, huge component of this variant. Matt elected to then run 2 copies of Sakuratsu Armor. To go along with that battle-based removal, we had 1 copy of Mirror Force. We had a Torrential Tribute, a Ring of Destruction, and a Call of the Haunted. So most of the borderline staples at the time period. I'm going to go through and show you some of the features of the extra deck. Now, the only way that this deck was going to the extra deck was actually using the variant that I'm going to profile in a moment, Philly Lunas. So the cards in the extra deck were, for all intents and purposes, unnecessary. at least in Matt's version. But it was 2 copies of Cyber Twin Dragon, technically 2 copies of Cyber End Dragon, but I have 1 here. And then at least 1 copy of Chimera Tech. Honestly, you only really need 1 copy of each of these. The only way that you were actually using any of the extra dark cards is if you ran the more combo-based variant of Philly Luna. So instead of going into a side deck, because honestly, the side decks during this format I don't think are really great, and we've already profiled a couple decks this format with cards from the side deck, so I've already talked about pulling the rug and Decree and some of those cards. Instead, for this video, I'm going to actually profile 2 decks at once. So the deck that I first profiled was the variant ran by Matt Peddle at the Canadian Nationals, where we got the top 8. Another popular version of the deck that I actually have built, so beyond just the cards that I'm profiling, I have a deck, a giant cardboard box of old format decks. The version of machines that I use is actually the Philly Luna variant that he used, because I like the fact that it's more combo-centric. I find that to be quite a bit more fun. So here are the 7 card swaps between the Matt Peddle more controlling variant, which is the one at the bottom, with cards like Sakura, Summer, and Tomato, and then the more OTK-based one that Philly Luna popularized, which is where we actually are going to see a copy of Future Fusion and Overload Fusion, which was honestly pretty much the standard. Matt started here, more controlling. As the format progressed, the upper level here became the standard. Dark Magician of Chaos was questionable. I have played the current format that I'm profiling now quite a few times in person, and whenever I do play against Billy Brake, he always gets upset that I use the machine variant with Dark Magician of Chaos, because he was a big opponent of Dark Magician of Chaos. So not every variant ran this. This was optional, but the version that I do run does in fact include a copy of it. Your deck runs multiple copies, at least in the new version here that I'm profiling, of Snipe Hunter and then even Morphing Jar. So it is easy to put Dark Magician of Chaos in the graveyard, and then you're trying to OTK more commonly or more frequently than the Matt Peddle version. So it ends up, I think, having a nice little spot. So in terms of the trap lineup, the only change is we're taking out the Sakuratsu armors and adding Mind Crush. So now we have Mind Crush and Trap Dash Shoot. The spell lineup is actually really interesting in the Philly Luna version. It's now all 1-ofs. So it's just 1-of power cards. We have 1 Giant Trinade, 1 Heavy Storm, 1 Mystical Space Typhoon, 1 Future and 1 Overload Fusion. They were both limited to 1 at this point. We're going to send all of the machines in our deck to summon Chimera Tech, or send all of the Cyber Dragons for Cyber End, or 2 Cyber Dragons for Cyber Twin. It kind of depends on your hand. One of the cool things that you could do is actually send all of the machines in your deck and then Pot of Avarice immediately. That was a really cool turn 1 play. But then again, all 1-ofs, power 1-ofs, limited removal, scapegoat to avoid OTK, confiscation, premature, snatch, nobleman, dupe, and 1 brain. Interesting choice. Philly Luna decided to run only 1 copy of each of these. And then for the monster lineup, it's going to be, of course, a little bit different than Matt's. The typical, this was sort of non-negotiable, 3 Cyber Phoenix, 3 Card Trooper, 3 Cyber Dragon, 3 Dekoichi, and the Jinzo. That was non-negotiable. Philly elected to up the Snipe Hunter count to 2. Again, he's trying to OTK a little bit more. So when you have Snipe Hunter with cards like Future and Over, you actually can make it so that you clear out the back roads and then overload. Even honestly without Future Fusion sometimes. That can be enough to win. Sangin, he elected to run Morphing Jar. Again, with his variant, he's running a lot of spell cards that require 2-card combos. So if you have a dead Overload, maybe you can just Morphing Jar into more combo pieces, or you can use Morphing Jar to ditch something like Dark Magician of Chaos. And then with this deck, with so many powerful spell 1-ofs, you have so many possibilities in the graveyard, so that when your Dark Magician of Chaos does work, which, and this is going to seem really narrow, but it's typically going to happen by one of the recursion cards, Premature Burial or Call of the Haunted, that you get back a really powerful spell that usually can just win the game outright. So these are the 2 variants of the Machine Beatdown deck that honestly, by the middle to end of the format, was probably the best deck. I think by the end of the format, with the Trap Dash Shoots and the really heavy emphasis on hand destruction with the Cyber Phoenixes, this deck really attacked the format perfectly. You know, at the US Nationals Adam Corrin run, we just profiled that deck within the last month. This deck does a fantastic job counteracting soul exchanges and brain controls. And then this deck does a fantastic job attacking the T-Hero strategy with all of this hand disruption. I mean, let me tell you, it was really, 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 really hard to run combo-centric decks when your opponent was running all of these cards. At the Shonen Jump Philadelphia this year, I was young at the time, but I actually ran DDT of all things. I borrowed an entire DDT deck at the age of 16, which, besides the D-Draws and Malicious, I own those, but the Magical Stone Excavations were over $100 each, and I got to borrow them. Well, I think it was round 3 or 4, I played against Hugo Adem, who was actually already running a variant of machines, not quite as refined as the Philly Luna version or the Matt Peddle version that I'm profiling now. But he hit me with these dust shoots, and let me tell you, trying to run a combo deck like DDT against dust shoot, not fun. So this package here of the dust shoot, Mind Crush, and then to a lesser extent the Confiscation, really beat up on the T-Hero decks. And then, of course, talking about Cyber Phoenix, counteracted the Monarch deck. So this deck really, by the middle to end of the format, I think was probably the best deck in the room.